welcome to the Center Court MBA Festival. My name is Jeff Schmitt, Senior Writer for Poets and Quants. And today we're going to be taking a deeper dive into the full-time MBA program at the Desautels Faculty of Management at McGill University. I am being joined by J.P. Ferguson, Academic Director for the McGill MBA Program. JP spent a decade at Stanford, and this past year was named the Distinguished MBA Core Teaching Award recipient. So JP, welcome.
Thank you, Jeff. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, let's start with the basics of the MBA program at Desautels. Talk to me about kind of the course selection, both the core and also the other courses that you offer, and maybe what is required, what is something that students can choose, and maybe talk a little bit about maybe what differentiates a little bit in those areas.
Of course. So in terms of, I think what's important to have in the back of your mind as we discuss this, let me give you some of the logic for what is required and what is chosen, so I can maybe answer two of those questions at once. The McGill we sit in a slightly unusual position in Canada insofar as a large portion of our student body comes from outside North America. And a lot of those students want to work and live in Canada, which is great. But that does mean that those students have an interest in a program of a certain length, which helps them in terms of things like immigrating to Canada, getting a work permit after graduation, and so on. Whereas I think that a lot of Canadians are actually looking for shorter length MBA programs, more in the 12 to 16 month range, as opposed to the full 20-month that we associate with the traditional 2-year MBA program. And one of the things that we decided when redesigning our MBA a few years ago was to see if we could split that difference, which is to say that we created a program that has a flexible length, allowing students who start at the same time to finish at different times, depending on those particular career needs. What that means is that you want to make sure you get a lot of the core up front for two reasons. One, if students are going to be around for less time, you have less time to make sure to deliver the required classes, but also to make sure that you get that cohort formation happening in the early months of a program. I always draw the analogy to software firms. This is so Californian of me, so just bear with me for a moment, that I've known many software firms where you can leave at any time of the day if the work is done, right, and no one needs you, but everyone starts at the same time in the morning so that no one's sitting around waiting and, for other people. And so we have a lot of that same sense with the MBA. It's important that the cohort starts together. If some people finish a little sooner, that's okay. The practical implications of that is that the fall term, students are taking required classes. This is when they spend time going through sort of the survey of academic topics and areas that are associated with an MBA, your classic econ, finance, accounting, strategy, marketing, operations, organizational behavior, as well as business statistics, and a course we call leadership and professional skills, which is fundamentally about presentation of self, public speaking, and the rest. That last class is also an important one because it's the one where both sections of our MBA are together, one night a week, learning to talk and present to one another. It's, again, one of those chances that they all have to come together. After the fall term, there are really only, pauses, does math in head, I think 2 classes that are required for the rest of the MBA. One of those is a class called Real-Time Decisions that happens in the winter term of your first year. That's an experiential class where we work with a partner company who is making strategic decisions. And essentially we pile on students who are doing pro bono consulting for that company. The second is the international study trip that, and I have to laugh as we're entering the 3rd year of the pandemic, in normal times happens in April of the student's first year. But beyond that fall core and those 2 classes, we transition immediately into electives.
Thank you very much. Your program has some very unique features to it. One is a very strong coaching culture. You are also becoming particularly strong in entrepreneurship. Talk to me about the real strengths of the McGill MBA program and the real benefits that students will gain from those strengths.
Of course. I think that one of the things that Desautel does well is it builds a strong sense of cohort solidarity, partly by having a small class. We have just under 100 students most of the time, and they spend a lot of time together. That network is very dense. It also means that we can provide our sort of like, even with a relatively small staff, our staff to student ratio in terms of the time devoted to the students remains relatively high among MBA programs as a whole. And so McGill has, Desautel has a reputation to some extent as a swing school, which is to say people who are interested in changing industries or changing employers at some point. And you can't do that without support from a strong career services group. And so traditionally, now there are things that we are good at and have historically been good at, one of the obvious ones being finance. I mean, Montreal being the, still in certain ways, the financial capital of Canada, though we can fight with Toronto about that. South of the border, you don't have to worry about this particular grudge match. And analytics is another area where we are strong. And that's sort of a general Montreal point that in terms of machine learning and artificial intelligence, Montreal has done quite well. And I bring up machine learning and artificial intelligence because that's one of the things that has been helping us quite a lot with entrepreneurship in recent years. I think historically, and by historically, I mean decades ago, Canadian schools were not well known for their training in things like entrepreneurship. And to some extent, that reflected that Canada was not strongly known for its history of entrepreneurship or otherwise. The development, particularly in Montreal over the last 10 to 15 years, of quite a large research and practice community around machine learning, artificial intelligence, and so on, has meant that we've seen the beginnings of a real startup ecosystem in Montreal. And at the same time, at Desautel, we founded the Dobson Center for Entrepreneurship about a decade ago. And the Dobson Center, ironically, its main clients aren't even Desautel, it's the rest of McGill. Insofar as Dobson often plays a matchmaking service of taking faculty or graduate students who have really interesting ideas that could be commercialized. And whenever possible, we try to pair them with business expertise. Particularly what we've been trying to develop in the last couple of years is new classes where, again, we have MBA students who are taking classes that are sort of run together with the Dobson Center, where they are providing a lot of that consultancy and advice on writing business plans, developing, making pitches to funders and the like, to faculty, graduate students and the like from elsewhere in the university who have interesting ideas that they want to spin off. And so that gives us an opportunity to really have a chance, like we have a chance to put a lot of those ideas in practice. And so in terms of having an experiential class around entrepreneurship, not just that the students have ideas that they want to pitch, but that they're working with people who are trying to develop new principles. That, I think, is one of the things where we're trying to, like, we have some strength and we really want to double down on that.
Thank you. Talk to us a little bit about the teaching approaches at Desautel. You know, the mix of maybe case studies to experiential learning to lectures to simulations. Talk to us about the diversity of approaches that is utilized at the program.
Happily. This is something that I think is in flux. We still have, I think that the share of lectures has been going down in quite a few of our classes, obviously outside the core. Some of the core classes, teaching principles of accounting, it's hard to do that in a simulation, though they do some simulations as assignments, of course. And actually, the share of case-based teaching is not as large as you would think. Having come from a university that used cases a lot more strongly, I think for me, I think cases are quite important within business schools, but we often confuse teaching a case with experiential teaching. Like, in other words, we confuse the application of a concept, which is often what we're using a case to teach, is different from the students themselves applying the concept. And so we have been trying to shift some of our focus from talking about cases to developing classes that are more experiential, where students are actually doing and making some of the decisions that previously they would have analyzed in a case. Simulation varies. But this is one of the odd silver linings, and all silver linings of the pandemic are tarnished, let's be clear. But one of the silver linings of the pandemic has been forcing a lot of us to reconsider how we have tended to teach things in the past, where just the hurdle of online teaching is that giving a long lecture to a class over Zoom is deadly. And so a lot of us basically decided to reconsider some of our teaching approaches during the pandemic, and have discovered actually that there's some really good techniques here that we want to keep using after the pandemic. I got into the habits, as did a few of my colleagues, as recording some of the more lecture parts of our classes as essentially podcasts, with the idea that students could, you can listen to that while you're doing the dishes, for example. And then the lecture's out of the way and we can use the class to discuss things instead. And this is, for me, an evolution of things that we were doing in terms of flipping the classroom when I was in California, that I've loved the chance to continue to build on and develop at Des Hotels. So I think among the more interesting classes are ones where at this point, we try to keep the sort of blackboard instruction to a relative minimum and focus on those kind of conversations and have things that students read in advance. And like I said, trying to develop classes where they're putting principles into action as opposed to reading about other people applying those principles. For me, pedagogically, that's the future.
Thank you, JP. Let's talk a little bit about the academics and the concentration. What are some of the both the common and unique concentrations offered at Des Hotels, and also the type of support that you provide students, both academically, such as, and also career-wise, such as, you have a very renowned mentorship program?
Sure. It's so funny because I immediately want to correct you and say specializations, and this is entirely bureaucratic inside baseball at my university in terms of what those mean. But yes, let's talk. I'll use the term concentrations here. So we have, historically, we used to have 4, which were global strategy and leadership, marketing, business analytics, and finance. A fairly unsurprising list of concentrations. And also the type that tends to reflect the hierarchy of the faculty itself and the division of labor within the faculty more than it reflects the actual phenomena that students care about. And so, for example, we don't have an entrepreneurship group, though we have quite a few faculty that study entrepreneurship related topics. And so the minute we redesigned the program, I said, look, we should roll out a specialization tomorrow in entrepreneurship. We have the classes there. We can create this, and we should continue to develop courses in this way. I think that for the first time this year, we're graduating someone with a specialization in retail. And I bring this up because also at McGill, we have the Ben-Sadoun School of Retail Management, which was established with a very large, generous gift in 2018. And so we have one of the relatively few Masters of Management in retail, which focuses extensively on things like logistics, analytics, but also customer service and the rest. And for quite a few of our students who are interested in things like fast fashion, but also supply chains, consumer packaged goods, and the rest, the ability to take classes related to that subject is one where we're hoping that in the years ahead, since we already have synergy with the retail school, we'll be able to offer that kind of concentration. So entrepreneurship and retail come to mind. The question of what business analytics is going to look like in a few years is frankly interesting to me, because I think that right now we're in a position where people who are not comfortable with big data and quantitative analysis have started to notice that this seems to matter, but it's too broad a term, right? And I think we're at a point in society where we haven't figured out, because really the truth is, if I have someone who's graduating as in a Master of Management in Analytics, which we do offer at Des Hotels, what they're learning is quite different from what someone who's getting an MBA in business analytics should be learning. And by that, I mean, I'm not hiring an MBA to write a particular type of model. I can hire someone who has a specialized master's in that. Ideally, I'm hiring the MBA to figure out how we can use these new technologies and techniques in our existing business, like how we can change our operations, how we consider reforming our hiring practices, and so on. But currently, I think out in the market, a difficulty that all MBA programs are facing is we need some term other than business analytics, but people don't recognize what that is yet. Sorry, that's a long-winded answer on this point, but I think trying to figure out what that looks like in the future is going to be important. Can I mention one other?
Please.
It's actually something that I don't currently offer a specialization in, and I think we shouldn't for several years, and that's sustainability. And I have to clarify that, because I had many faculty who said, obviously, we should offer a specialization in sustainability. And I said, look, I agree that sustainability is an incredibly important topic. We live on a planet that in certain ways seems to be dying, and I care about that, and we should be integrating that into how we manage our businesses. However, we're not yet at the point where, while we have quite a few faculty who do excellent research on sustainability, and as a school, we rate pretty well when it comes to sustainable management, I don't want to just catch a wave and throw up a specialization in sustainability right away, because I think this is important enough. We should be thinking about how we redesign those core classes. That sustainability is something that we should teach in those foundational classes. And only after we're good at doing that should we think about adding an additional specialization around sustainability. And so this is one of the spots where I think my goal is not to graduate, for example, 15% of our students with a specialization in sustainable management. My goal would be that, for example, 20% of our students graduate with a specialization in business analytics, but they have been exposed to principles of sustainable management. 30% graduate with a specialization in finance, but have been exposed to principles of sustainable management in finance, and so on down the line.
Thank you. Thank you, JP. Let's talk a little bit about the importance of soft skills, the problem solving, the communication. How does Desautels integrate that both within the regular programming curriculum and also the type of activities and extracurriculars that you offer?
We bring it in several. We bring in soft skills in several ways. One of the reasons we instituted our leadership and professional skills course was we had students coming to us and saying, look, we really appreciate the work that career services does for students as they get ready to look for jobs, but so much of that currently comes relatively late within an MBA program. We think it should start at the beginning. And I agreed with them. Insofar as what's really interesting about soft skills is that if you go back and you look at MBA programs 30 or 40 years ago, almost all MBA programs had some version of a soft skills, interpersonal skills curriculum. And yet by about 20 years ago, many of those had disappeared. I think as the perception in the labor market that an MBA was primarily and increasingly a technical degree, the importance of those soft skills became devalued. Now, as I think many business schools, much like we've done at Desautels, have started to think about offering additionally specialized masters around those technical disciplines, and that sort of allows the MBA to come back into its own as a degree focused on general management, then the relative importance of those interpersonal skills is brought back to the fore. And so we spend a lot of time both sort of formally in class, informally through things like clubs, whether that be the consulting group, whether that be the case competition association, whether that be Toastmasters on campus. But we also, as we have increased our number of experiential offerings, as I was describing, suddenly one's ability to present isn't just a question of sort of academic clarity and performance, but you're talking to a real client pretty early in your MBA. And so that is both, I think it drives home for students the need to develop such skills, but also gives them an opportunity to practice them. Where that has tended to work quite well for us is often the people who are evaluating them in those classes are themselves alumni of Desautels. And so that is another spot where I think the virtuous circle that any business school tries to develop between its current students and its alumni has been very helpful. Because no matter how many times a professor like me says that those soft skills are important, they will always take it more seriously when a successful alum of the same program tells them the same thing.
Thank you. Let's talk a little bit about intercultural experience at Desautels. I believe it is 75% roughly non-Canadian at the school.
It's a little high this year. We've tended the last 10 years or so, we've been around 65 to 70%. The last 2 years, it's a bit higher.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Talk to me about, diversity as a strength within the school and the ability for your students to be able to navigate various cultures, different languages, traditions, and business etiquette. How does Des Hotels really reinforce that and really prepare students to go into global leadership where they may be managing people in other countries with very, very different backgrounds, not just different skill sets?
Right. This is where I think this is one of those spots where the relatively small cohort and a fairly strong alumni network really shines. Because, yeah, as mentioned, I still remember when one of my very senior colleagues at a different institution was talking to me about the importance of, diversity, global management, and so on. And, said person had grown up in Wisconsin on a farm. But the class that we were in was from 34 different countries. And I wanted to be like, we don't need to explain to them the importance of learning these things. And that has been a real shift. I think when I was a graduate student, a lot of our discussion about diversity in the classroom was basically teaching largely North Americans the importance of paying attention to cultural differences abroad. As MBA education has continued to diversify in terms of the countries that we draw people from, we have those conversations in the classroom itself. And so I think that, again, we have the advantage that we have a strong alumni network. So many of these students are plugged in fairly early and meet people who have made the same transition themselves. Mm-hmm. And so, we have students who are coming to Canada who say, for example, I've never lived outside of India, and I'm concerned about adjusting to doing business in North America. And to meet, half a dozen graduates who themselves came from India and have made that transition has historically been very useful. Also, like any organization that has a strong culture, I think there's a Des Hotels culture sort of distinct to some extent from a general Quebecois or Canadian culture. And so I think learning those two things at the same time can be quite valuable for people. For me, I think one of the real strengths of that kind of diversity is I don't understand how MBA programs expect to survive if they don't embrace that. And by that, I mean, currently, I think programs in North America have a really privileged position right now to much the same extent that Western Europe does, that people from Asia, people from Africa, in really disproportionate numbers choose to come to North America and Western Europe for their graduate education. And, like you, I'm American myself, and I think about how 100, 120 years ago, Americans who wanted to get graduate degrees went to Europe. And eventually that changed, right? And we don't think it's a bad thing that North Americans don't feel a need to travel abroad to get graduate degrees at this point. I don't think it's a bad thing if, for example, students in Asia, students in Africa, students in Latin America, at some point decide they don't need to travel abroad as much. At that point, it's going to be your school's reputation and how you have embraced that diversity in the past, and the kind of alumni networks you have built with countries in the past that will keep students choosing your institution in the future. And this is something that we have to think about a lot in Canada. I mean, to state the obvious, there are more Californians than there are Canadians. Business schools in Canada find it difficult to survive on the Canadian market alone. And so this is not just something that we embrace because it makes us stronger. It's something we embrace because we have to, and we think it's important.
Thank you, JP. Final question. Let's look ahead into the crystal ball for Des Hotels. What are some ways that you see the program evolving? You've talked a little bit about sustainability, mm-hmm. and things that are in the pipeline that will make the school more attractive to students and also enhance the educational experience they enjoy.
I think that first, to be clear, my dream is that in, 2022? We've just hit the new year. So in 2032, when a student is considering going for an MBA and they're interested in sustainable management, I want McGill to be one of their obvious top 5, maybe top 3 choices. Like, that is my dream. I think that is a space where we have the potential to distinguish ourselves if we work on it. Related to that, my vision of sustainability has a very strong role for data and analytics, because I think that if sustainability is about internalizing externalities, literally accounting for things that we have not accounted for in the past, the way we do that is by the gathering of more and better data and analyzing it. That implies that we don't go backwards to become more sustainable. Often our industries, our supply chains, our HR systems have to grow more complex, not less. And so my dream is we figure out a way to make those 2 sets of skills, a focus on sustainability and a focus on analytics, dovetail. Currently, I think in the popular conception, there is an idea that 2 very different types of students go to graduate school, interested in those 2 different topics. And I want it to be the same. I think that the increase in experiential courses is also something that we should continue to stress. This, by the way, is another tarnished silver lining of the pandemic. I don't think, so in the first few months of the pandemic, I think we had a lot of people saying, wow, maybe this is going to kill off in-person instruction. Maybe we're going to see a lot more schools moving online. Now that we have demonstrated we can teach a large number of courses online. I think the real answer is we can teach courses better online. Like, we can teach a lot of courses online that maybe people thought we couldn't. You cannot socialize a cohort online. You cannot develop those connections with alumni online. On the other hand, to have someone come and speak to your class, our default for years has been, well, you really have to fly them here in order for them to give a presentation that students are going to care about. And I think that, and people were very nervous to give online presentations beforehand. It has become trivially easy, other than getting the schedules to mesh, for me, for example, to bring in a speaker to my class who might be based in British Columbia, or for that matter, London, and speak to the class. And so our ability to branch out in the type of experiential context we have, both in terms of outside speakers, people that our students can consult with, and the rest, like, that's going to grow. And so I think it's being smart about how we can use basically the final pandemic-driven arrival of video conferencing in the classroom is, of course, going to be a major change in a lot of our schools. And that, to be clear, that requires investments, that requires changes in infrastructure. Right now, I think for many of us, teaching a blended class, which is to say some people in the classroom and some people online, is the worst of both worlds. But that's entirely an infrastructure issue that if we can fix. The bigger problem was removing people's assumptions about the viability of video conferencing within education. Now that we've crossed that barrier, I think there's a lot of opportunities for us to explore and innovate.
Thank you, JP. Any final words that you would like to have to Poets and Quants readers and prospective MBA applicants?
This is where I should have a sales pitch better prepared. But no, I have tried to answer these questions as straightforward and honestly as I can, is the real truth. And I think that I chose to come to McGill because I was excited about changes that I was seeing in Montreal. I think this is a fascinating city in which to live and to work. And I think McGill is a really fascinating university to be affiliated with as I watch the growth of yet another startup ecosystem around this city. And, as long as you can bring a good coat with you, I think that it is, never mind, we're also one of the most affordable cities in North America. This is a place that you overlook at your peril.
Thank you. Hat and gloves too.
Oh gosh, this is the time of year when we point out it's actually very easy. You just, if you're going to go outside, you put on your spacesuit and off you go. So
at least you can walk around underground too.
Yeah, we try not to bring up the climate too much in our recruiting materials, but this came up. The strongest, honestly, the biggest recommendation I've ever given for Montreal is just to say, 3.5 years ago, I moved here from the Bay Area and I've never regretted it. People did ask me, how will you survive the winters? And I said, I'll take my savings in rent from the first month and I'll buy a coat. And after that, it's pretty much profit. And that has absolutely been the case. It's a lovely place to live.
Thank you, JP. And thank you, Poets and Quants readers. And please take a look at McGill University's Desautels Faculty of Management. Thank you very much.
Cheers.